start this video with a simple question. Do you read the comments? The comment section has a bad reputation for a number of reasons. Generally, most comments have little substance. They're often just regurgitations of memes, for instance. They typically use improper grammar. They might exist only to say that the video or the topic it covers is good or bad without actually justifying that position. There's even a fair amount of trolls who just want attention by taking cheap shots at others. Despite these common issues, comment sections do serve several purposes. I could make an entire video going into the types of discussions that I've had in them and describing the satisfaction of having a YouTuber love one of your comments. However, what I really want to talk about today is a band that I got into through a certain individual who I met in one of these comment sections. I'd say that I pay attention to the profiles of no more than 1% of the people I interact with on YouTube. There are a few ways to get into that 1%, however. For example, I decided to check out Ranting Monkey's channel after I read a brief and insightful rant that he left in a comment section. Likewise, I decided to check out Life, the Universe in Action because he left a comment on a video saying that he had made a related video to that video. On the other hand, sometimes I check out a profile just because it's weird and funny. That's where Taint Destroyer comes in. Yeah. I decided to check out his channel and I found that he was a fellow guitarist. I commented on his first and only video, he commented on my first and only video, and things developed from there. You can find him under many of my videos in the comments, and while he's now listed as Gary Glitter, his true internet persona is in fact Benushka. After a while, I eventually decided to check out his SoundCloud, and I found some fascinating material. You can find an eclectic variety of songs in his solo catalog, ranging from alternative rock to folk music. However, what I really want to talk about today is a little band called Red Neptune, of which he is the bassist and vocalist. Red Neptune is a relatively new progressive rock band from Bellevue, Washington. They're still in the demo phase, and they have released 5 songs thus far, all of which can be found on SoundCloud. While they're not masterpieces, they are still worth checking out if you have the time, and there's already a trend of improvement among them. In terms of the band's style, I would say that they have some similarities to bands that fall into what I like to call the great rock band category. This is a simply named category that I reserve for bands that don't do much outside of the typical modern rock formula, but still have their own unique combinations of familiar elements. Foo Fighters was one of the first to have this sort of style, and if you're a fellow fan of Japanese rock, you might recognize this style in bands like Elgarden, Unlimits, and, to an extent, One OK Rock. Red Neptune is similar to these bands, but only in a vague sense. What sets it apart from these alternative rock bands is the influence taken from progressive rock and classic hard rock. I'll admit that I'm no expert in either subgenre, but I know them when I hear them. Listening to some of the grooves and jams in songs like Nazicales reminds me of Led Zeppelin and its derivatives. Psst, newbie reviews Led Zeppelin 4 coming someday. The progressive rock style manifests itself in the more ambitious aspects of the songs, such as sprawling song structures, various changes in tempo and tone, complex chords, and little bits of experimentation here and there. The reason why I feel tempted to just slap the great rock band label on Red Neptune is that their music isn't really all that groundbreaking as far as progressive rock goes. There just isn't enough experimentation for me to say that it's all that unique. Regardless, they do have their own distinctive blend of familiar elements, and when it comes to what they actually do, they do it really well. The members' playing isn't exactly anything new, but it's quite technical. Guitarist Nick Gale, for example, is great with churning out fun riffs, ripping solos, abrasive sounds, and complex chords with ease. His drummer Alan Moore isn't exactly a god on drums, but he clearly knows how to spice up a song rather than just support it. Benushka's bass playing is very much the same in that regard. He also adds vocals to 2 of the 5 songs, and they can be a bit too passionate at times, just a bit overbearing. Also, he uses some weird effects. Still, what really helps me like his voice is just the strange charisma that he brings to his parts. It's hard to explain, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, most likely, but you might like it. As a unit, the band's playing sounds raw in a good way. In some cases, the guys could have played slightly more in sync, but any minor technical errors are barely even noticeable. Besides, I'm guilty of those too. The only place where the songs are lacking, sometimes sorely lacking, is in the production. There is a general lack of clarity, and the instruments don't always come together in a cohesive way in the mix. This drastically reduces the quality of a lot of the songs that have been released thus far. I can't exactly blame the guys for this though. With a fan base that's still numbering somewhere in the double digits, they wouldn't be making enough money from the band alone to pay for better equipment. I suppose that since they are adults, well, if this is how you define adults, they don't have the excuse of being a jobless teenager like me. Still, I don't know anything about their financial situations, so I can't really make any assumptions about them. Besides, money can't buy experience, and even within their 5 released songs, there's already a small but clear improvement in production. I realize that I haven't talked much about each song individually, and that's because I couldn't find a good way to center the review around the songs. Red Neptune's style is both consistent and flexible, so even though there's a pretty good amount of variety throughout the songs, I've already explained their most important characteristics for the most part. Still, there are some individual quirks in each song that are worth going into. Acid Bath, the first song, is a fun and accessible rock song. It contains great guitar melodies and bass grooves. It also features vocals, and they're executed quite well. Unfortunately, they're way louder than the instruments, which causes the song to suffer as a result. I know this is coming from a guy who records his music on a potato, but at least my video editing software allows me to adjust the volumes of each individual track. Musicians like Red Neptune, as well as just about any other musician or content creator, have no reason not to do this. Still, Acid Bath is very well performed and well written, so I'll give it a pass on that. It's a good song. Nazukales, I'm sorry if I butchered that, is the first instrumental of the bunch. The instruments still sound a bit muffled and disjointed, but at least they're all perfectly audible this time around. The band got a bit more experimental with song structure, and Nick Gale started adding more harsh noises to his playing. His strange, experimental solo is definitely the high point of this song. Other than that, the style is essentially the same as it was in Acid Bath. I'd say this is a solid song, but I wouldn't say it's anything special. It's just catchy enough. Next up is Daedalus. It's another instrumental, and it has the same kind of production and songwriting that the last song had. Still, it's on a bigger scale, having a 6-minute runtime. Also, in other ways, it's a bit bolder, and in my opinion, it's superior. It starts out well enough, but then it slows down and goes into this different passage with some really fun riffs and chord progressions for much of its runtime. I also love how it seamlessly transitions back into the original melodic hook and tempo once it's done. After that, it continues for a little while longer until it ends with this really weird, repeated passage. I can't really describe it other than saying that it's oddly satisfying. You have to hear it for yourself to see what I mean. Overall, Daedalus is a very solid song. It's pretty excellent, despite its subpar production values. Digging the Grave Part 1 marks a slight stylistic shift for Red Neptune. It features Ben's vocals once again, and instead of being way too loud, they're just a tiny bit too soft. Still, that's just relative to the instruments. The track as a whole is actually a lot louder compared to Red Neptune's other 3 demos, even when controlling for volume settings. The instruments sound like they're maxing out the audio, which is slightly annoying. At the same time, though, they're clearer than ever, and they sound less disjointed in the mix than they did in previous songs. The songwriting is very tight and refreshing, Nick sounds better than ever on guitar, and the tempo is catchy, which makes this the most energetic Red Neptune song yet. Overall, Digging the Grave Part 1 is a very good rock song, and I find it really enjoyable. The 5th and last demo from Red Neptune thus far is simply titled Lie. Despite its short title, it's actually just as long and complex as Daedalus, and I dare say that it is better. In terms of its composition and tempo, it's a lot like Digging the Grave, and the instruments come through just as clearly here as they did on that song. The main differences are that they're not as loud, and they don't have any vocals on them. In fact, it also has a lot of things in common with Red Neptune's other instrumentals, like Nazukales and Daedalus. Like I said, it's just as long and complex as Daedalus, but it doesn't have any sudden tempo shifts or other obvious twists and turns. It introduces its ideas more gradually, because that's all that's really needed. The riffs, melodies, chord progressions, and other elements are catchy and infectious enough to carry the song on their own. Ultimately, Lie is just filled with interesting ideas. It's a very enjoyable and well-rounded experience that I recommend to anyone who is a fan of awesome rock music. It should be clear by now that Red Neptune is a band on the rise. It's not every day that you hear a band go straight from good to great in just 5 songs. If If these guys had more fans, they would already be arguing over whether their Acid Bath era or Digging the Grave era were better. WTF? This is awful. They used to be so good, and now they're making this lie shit. Like, whose idea was this? Stop whining. They're just trying new styles, and if you don't like that, you can just fuck off. Figures that a brainwashed newbie like you would fall for this crap. I remember when their music was creative and had soul, and now it just sucks. Can we all just stop yelling at each other and listen to the music? We're all fans and no one wants to hear you argue. Let's just enjoy the music and stop being so angry! Gee, how about you guys take a break and relieve all that sexual tension? Lenny face. In conclusion, Red Neptune is a very promising band that I think you should all check out. I've put links in the description as always. Now, I want to give their songs ratings, but I feel like rating each individual song is becoming repetitive. Also, they don't have any albums to rate as a whole, so I think I'll arbitrarily group the demos together in ways that make sense. I think their first 3 songs sound like they could be an EP or a maxi single, so I'll give that a 7 out of 10, just due to the very decent songwriting but also lackluster production. I feel like both of those things were improved upon with the next 2 songs, which is like a single with a B-side, so I'll give that a 9 out of 10. Okay, I think I'm pretty much done here, but before I go, I just want to say that I'm not going to keep playing favorites with this series. I might do at least one other shoutout with this series, but I'm not going to make this a regular thing. If I thought that Ben's band was anything less than great, I wouldn't have done this for them. And it's a small favor anyway, since I don't really have that much of a reach. They actually probably have more of a reach in total than I do. Still, I just thought it would be nice, and I do personally recommend the band. If you want to see anyone else I recommend and who I have at least loose connections to, you can just check out a list of my featured channels. Anyways, I'm MeowTheRainbowX, and this has been another episode of Up and Coming.